Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to the webinar on COVID-19's impact on cybersecurity opportunity challenges in future roadmap. It is organized by 28 Convergence India Expo and Exhibitions India Group. And Data Security Council of India is the knowledge partner for this, and we thank them for their continued support. We have with us very experienced panel to share their thoughts and insights. It's a 90-minute session, and the moderator of the session is Mr. Sundareshwar Krishnamurthy, and he is partner cybersecurity with PwC India. Now I am handing over to Mr. Krishnamurthy. Sir,
Thanks,
over to
Aarti,
you.
and thanks, Aarti, and good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this webinar. I hope all of you are doing safe and healthy. We have a very interesting panel today, and if I just do a quick math, maybe more than 120 years of experience in cybersecurity. I'll quickly introduce myself and the panelists. I'm a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I focus on cybersecurity in the India and the Middle East market. We have with us Rama. Rama is the CEO of Data Security Council of India, and prior to that, she was a vice president with NASSCOM, with some amount of focus on domestic market and healthcare vertical. So, welcome, Rama. We also have with us Brijesh Singh, a very elite IPS officer who leads up the cyber activities and initiatives with the government of Maharashtra. And in his stint at government of Maharashtra, he's done very, very interesting projects on criminal tracking and so on and so forth. So we'll get to hear from him. Welcome, Brijesh. We have also with us Dr. Pavan Duggal. Pavan Duggal is a lawyer by profession, an advocate in the Supreme Court, with specialization in interest areas around cyber law and e-commerce law. He's also one of the top 10 lawyers in the world on this subject. So welcome, Pavan. We have Rakshit Tandon. Rakshit is a cyber advisor and a consultant to Cyber Peace Foundation. He's also a consultant to Internet and Mobile Associations of India. And interestingly, he's been helping the country at large in skill development related to cybersecurity for law enforcement agencies. So, Rakshit, welcome on board. And then we have two real practitioners when it comes to cybersecurity who are in there doing it day in, day out for their organizations. Please welcome Manish Tiwari, who's the Chief Information Security Officer of Bharti Airtel in his current role, and prior to that was the CISO at Microsoft. Manish is also an ex-defense personnel, and in his role within the defense, he was leading the CERT at the Indian Navy. So welcome, Manish. We have with us Arga. Arga has more than 25 years experience in cybersecurity, and right now leads cyber risk and security for Tata Advanced Systems. So welcome, Arga. Great. So we'll get started. I'll probably set the context and then go through the panel members with some questions that we may have. Like Aarti said, we will take your questions towards the end of the session through what you post for us, in the chat window. So just to set the context, I think there's been unprecedented change, as we all know, and this change has really affected the way most citizens in the country are using technology, and therefore most organizations in the country are using technology. And when that happens, the risk associated with using technology also changes in some form and shape. And therefore, cybersecurity becomes even more important, maybe in the new context that we're really operating on. So, Rama, my question to you to start with is what has really changed in terms of security from this work from anywhere environment. Just kind of demystify this for us. Rama, it seems that you're on mute, please.
So good afternoon to all of you who have joined us in this webinar, and thank you for having me here, Sundreshwar. What has changed? I'll just give you some sense of the numbers because essentially DSCI is part of the NASSCOM family and we are part of the IT industry, and of course we engage with all the verticals in India. If you just look at the IT industry workforce, it's about 4.3 to 4.5 million, which is the direct workforce, and then there's a lot of indirect workforce. Almost 90 to 95% safely, maybe in the first 2-3 weeks it was 95%, maybe now it is 90%, had to be enabled for work from home. And with all the user organizations that we engage with in India, almost all of them, including public sector oil and gas companies, they've pretty much moved a lot, even in their remote sites and all of that, from work from home, apart from some core essential services staff or data center staff that had to be. So it is really work from home at scale. Maybe some of our industry members, the global corporations, global services companies, which work in different time zones, always had some element of flexi work hours and work from home because they work at different time zones. Maybe that, I don't have an exact number, but I don't think it was more than 10% of any company's workforce. While they were enabled in terms of data cards or broadband at home and laptops. So you're looking at 95% of a 4.3 million workforce suddenly being had to make up for a work from home scenario. So what is the way in which you provision these endpoints at home, and how do you manage the security? The second one, because we were doing a lot of calls with CISOs in the first 5-6 weeks, we were having a weekly call with all the CISOs of across verticals. Whenever we had a very robust BCP enterprise strategy, the BCP was tested or was never tested for a scenario like this. Or BCP was never planned for a scenario like this. It was probably planned for natural disasters, an entire city coming down, or a seismic zone. So BCP was never tested for this thing. So this was something that I think has got the CIOs and CISOs working, and they didn't have time. I don't think there was a turnaround time that you will plan for this in a month's time or you'll plan for this for a week's time. Luckily, I think some of the companies which were serving global markets, they had, if they were already operating in a China, Japan, or they were operating in a Europe, they were beginning to get prepared 3 to 4 weeks ahead of Indian enterprises and services companies which works for India market, because they literally woke up when the lockdown was going to get implemented. So that was the challenge. I think the biggest challenge was there was always a protected enterprise network, perimeter security, and the secure devices. Now you have to implement that at very remote locations and ensuring that kind of endpoint security. The biggest challenge, Sundreshwar, is because most of the staff, whether it is IT or whether it is banking or whatever, they're finally dealing with an end customer and an end consumer data. So in that scenario, you need to make sure that data, the endpoint and the user also is following up the best safety security practices. People are dealing with personally identifiable data. The kind of best practices you have implemented on site, in office, at a customer location for privacy practices, or making sure that there is no data pilferage or all of that. To be able to do this at that scale and also make sure that monitoring is not too intrusive, there is a certain way in which you're building the awareness among employees. I think that was the biggest challenge. The endpoint security, work from at scale, completely having to reimagine what is BCP. Maybe this will give us a lot of lessons for the future. This would be my first few comments.
Sure, thanks, Rama. I think that sums it up really well. But if you really look at it, in the last 70 to 80 days that we've been really through this lockdown period, there seems to be, at least as per reports, an upsurge in the cybercrime activity in some form and shape, attacking organizations as well as general society at large. So, Brijesh, what can you tell us about some of the trends about what you're seeing in terms of cybercrime, and really what is it that one needs to do both as a citizen as well as an organization to this end?
Sure. First of all, it's so nice to see old friends here. Probably except Argha, I know everybody. I've been on panels with them, and I've had long friendships with many of you. So I'm very happy to see in this lockdown situation, I'm able to meet friends, old friends. As Rama rightly said, see, this is a black swan event. Nobody had thought of this, that the world would come to a standstill like this. And see, when 9/11 happened, so the commission report on 9/11 begins by saying that it's a failure of imagination, that we could never believe that something like this could happen. It was out of the range of our thinking. Similarly, all our BCP practices, they never thought of other than floods and earthquakes and different seismic zones and tier 4 data centers and redundancies and 99.2 and 99.5% availabilities. Nobody had thought of this. And that your whole working model will change. You'll be enclosed in a 20 by 20 space, working from very secure networks, using your home networks to log on to your important company infrastructure, where nothing like MDM, BYOD, nothing is going to work. And your VPNs and your home networks are as secure as possible. And how easy it's for anybody with preliminary skill sets to cross this. Having said this, if you look at, I'll come from the point of view of a law enforcement officer. We look at crime in terms of the theory of crime. Theory of crime says that when does crime happen? Crime happens when the perpetrator, victim, and opportunity come to a point. So this is the golden opportunity for all kinds of perpetrators. That the victims are available, very easily available, openly on run a census or run a Shodan, and you'll see what all is available, right from your home cameras to your connected devices. Everything is out there, wide open with hard-coded passwords and incorrect configurations. Everything is just wide out open there. So victims are available. The perpetrators are having a good opportunity to connect with their victims, and COVID has given a huge opportunity. So this opportunity is also by a total shift in the modes of work, but it also is in the contextuality, because 3/4 of all preliminary infection vectors still remain to be phishing, spear phishing, and social. Any crime today, the primary foothold is obtained through phishing and spear phishing. And see, COVID is something which is so contextual that be it misinformation or be it taxation relief or be it news about lockdown, everybody is just focused on wanting to know what's happening. It can be your internal company communications to, let's say, public functionaries or even WHO who are wanting to talk about what's happening. So this need for information has created a great opportunity for cyber criminals. And as I said, by theory of crimes, it's a golden meeting of these three things, and it's a great opportunity for cyber criminals. The ICANN has been saying that the number of domains which have been registered since January with the name COVID, Corona, or virus is ranging up to almost 200,000 in the last 3-4 months. So Corona and COVID themed domains have been registered in these very large numbers, and most, if not many, of them are with malicious purposes, because it takes time to classify a domain as malicious. But right now, people are using them as watering holes or as lures or as fishing points. With this proliferation, see that the criminal world has also specialized into a very modular network. So earlier you used to get services, like if you want to DDoS somebody, you could get it for $40 an hour. But now you also have malware as a service, that if you want a particular banking Trojan, then they are giving all the aspects, right from the spear phishing to if they have a CNC, they're giving you a CNC, they're giving you VPSs, VPNs. They're giving you a complete service, that particular malware. Similarly, in the darknet, there are COVID phishing like COVID maps or whatever you want. They have COVID and Corona themes which you can straight away implement and start serving people on any vector of compromise. So we see that the mode of working has changed. It has presented the criminals with an opportunity. They have pounced upon this opportunity. They are continuously scanning, looking for your credentials. Wherever data breaches are happening, they're using it for credential stuffing, getting foothold, then living off the land, sitting on your networks from there, using various things like Mimikatz or anything to laterally escalate, get privileges, and form permanent footholds on your infrastructure. Companies should be very careful about any anomalous behavior. They should be very careful about data. Primarily, they should identify where their important assets lie, where the crown jewels are, which are the important accounts. They should follow basic cyber hygiene by hardening, patching, and making people aware of the latest themes. Like if there is a particular document which says that COVID tax relief PDF, so they have to give them contextual information rather than general stuff like, oh, please use OTP, please use two-factor authentication other than OTP, don't install anything right now. You have to give them very specific and contextual IOCs and information for the day, because general platitudes are not going to work here. Again, coming to a broader scale, I feel that cybercrime is something which is very different from all modes of crime. Like general crime affects either one thing. It affects person, property, society, or state. Cybercrime is something which is encompassing everything. So on the personal front, right from your money to reputation, to let's say women who are being stalked or sextorted, to society where misinformation is being spread, state where the trust of state is being eroded, so on and so forth. Everything is being affected by cybercrime. We need to have, other than a comprehensive strategy which is evolving at the national level, we also need to have a specific strategy for individual, which is to be sort of crafted in consonance with what are your important assets, what is under attack, and who is your adversary. Because if you are somebody who's dealing with critical defense manufacturing, then you are facing an APT group. If you are a fintech, bank, merchant, anybody, then you are probably like Fin7 or Carbonac, which has very different capabilities. So you have to understand, there are people like Manish who come from the defense background. The principles of offense and defense, the principle of strategy remain very similar across domains. So the principles of information operations are age-old principles. They must have been used right from times of Alexander to Napoleon and Hitler to now, to the Soviet era and the Cold War. So these principles of disinformation are similar. Their modi operandi are similar. We have to understand this and build our own cyber defense. If we do not have, like food grains, you have to build your own cyber defense. If you don't have it, you are going to be breached if you have not already been breached. So right now, I think time is to be excessively vigilant, understand where your crown jewels are, where your important assets are, and craft a cyber security strategy for your own. And Pawan Duggal is also there. He would talk about legalities and the legal implications. Law firms are under attack. See, law firms have a lot of confidential data, and generally people like health or law, they are not very, conversant with or bothered about cybersecurity. Similarly, in industry also, a lot of IT people do cybersecurity, which is the worst thing that can happen. The IT people should not do cybersecurity. There has to be a maker-taker mechanism, and cybersecurity is an entirely different domain, which looks at offense and defense. So, final things that understand what is to be protected, understand who is your adversary, understand how the modus of attack is taking place, and build defense daily by being perpetually vigilant. If you slip up, the prices can be very high. Somebody is going to sit on your infrastructure, and you may probably discover it a year later, facing large breaches. And God forbid, if it involves anybody from the EU, GDPR, with every violation, 45% of your turnover will be the possible fine. So, final thing: be eternally vigilant, be careful, understand your infra, understand your adversary, and be cyber safe. Sundaresh.
Thanks, Brijesh. Complex problem has gotten even more complex. Always a pleasure hearing you, both for insights and also the way you articulate stuff. But if you really look at this, after we've got into this lockdown and all of us kind of working as well as dealing at home, sections of society which perhaps maybe senior citizens and children who would have lesser digital footprint actually have a far larger footprint now, because everything is really happening online, whether it's education or whether it's family calls that we're doing and so on and so forth. So what is it really that one needs to take care of to be safe and secure in this kind of an environment? Maybe Rakshit, I'll request you to throw us some views on this.
Yes, thank you, Chandreshwar. And namaskar to all the respected panelists. Thank you for inviting me. Vijesh sir, namaskar. Pawan sir, namaskar. Manish sir, namaste. Rama ma'am. I've been doing a lot of work with schools and college children for the last 10 years now on cyber safety. And especially what I feel, as you mentioned, yes, right, that digital footprints have increased. Pehle aadha din they had at least they had to go to a physical school and they had half day off from the digital devices, but today their classes are also online. So the school is virtual. They cannot go out and play, so the games are online. They can't meet their friends, so their social distancing is happening online on social media. And during this, you as a child and even as a senior citizen, you understand that when they're locked down, so psychologically also it is impacting them. And that is what we are seeing. There are a lot of classes being vandalized with obscene content. Social media where the group chats are coming out which are very obscene, sharing of a lot of personal and obscene content. So a lot of things have become messy, and that is where I think digital citizenship should be very important to be imparted to these students, young children, and to understand two words. One is security and privacy. As Vijay sir mentioned that it's a big opportunity for all three people now. For the perpetrator is there, the victim is there, and the golden opportunity is there. So they are not leaving any space. They are on social media. I am receiving complaints from students where they have been victimized on online games. There have been frauds happening on online games, the multiplayer games which they play. They have been victim of predators on social media who have misused their information and then tried to harass them. There have been incidences of people losing their SIM card to a 4G, 3G, 4G conversion scam and losing all their hard-earned money. So somebody called them saying that I'm converting your SIM from 3G to 4G and you will get better speed, and within 15 minutes his SIM was blocked, and third day he realized that he lost 9 lakh rupees from his saving account. So all kind of issues have come up, and this is why, because your digital footprints and your digital screen time has increased. So you become more vulnerable. So it's like if you are driving for 12 hours on the highway, you are always at a risk of having an accident. So the digital safety rules are very important to be imparted. The hackers are eyeing your smartphone devices. They want to get into your smartphone for personal information. As rightly said, 90% crime has increased on emails. There are a lot of phishing attacks, and people should know cyber hygiene should become a culture now. That if I'm sending a mail of invite to 15 people, I should not show their email IDs in the CC. It should be covered in BCC. So now one director of a school sends a meeting invite to 200 people and all the emails are published in CC. So now you are giving open access and invite to the hackers to have an access to all the. So cyber hygiene should become a culture in the mind right now. To be careful of all whatever scams are happening, and especially senior citizens, because now the money is also digital. The money is flowing digitally, and there have been helpline number frauds. We are seeing a lot of people getting conned by searching a wrong number on Google and calling him up and then getting scammed. We have KYC scams where they are making fake SMS in the name of wallets or in the name of these popular shopping sites. So all these kind of scams one needs to be aware of so that they are safe online. And children especially, they should know that now they are a digital citizen and they come under totally the ambit of cyber law. So any violation of law, like personating, making fake accounts, posting obscene content, these pranks, you can't call them a prank. It is a clear violation. So they should not get into trouble. So recently in Delhi, there was a issue which happened where some chats came out of children, private chats, which were very obscene, very obscene. And it became a big issue, and Delhi Cyber Cell has to pitch in. An FIR was filed, and 15 to 20 students were apprehended and questioned because the content was very obscene, and they were sharing inappropriate content and pictures of young children and minor children. So this is exactly what is happening, and I think it has to be a part now of their education and curriculum. Teachers were also facing challenges because they were also not equipped to the platform to take classes online. So there have been issues where there have been cases like Zoom bombing or vandalizing of online platforms. So I think everybody now, if you are an online citizen, you need to be aware of all the threats and safety and security measures.
Thanks, Rakshit. That was useful. But given all this, how is our overall legal framework in India also kind of updating itself to protect us, in the way we are operating now? And what kind of safeguards do we really have, Dr. Pawan? Dr. Pawan, you're on mute.
Thank you, Nareshwar, for this. I am just trying to share with you some couple of slides that I thought I'll prepare on this occasion to let you know my thoughts on this per se. So, I think when you raise this issue of legalities, we are often coming up with a mixed kind of a feeling or an approach, primarily because there's still not sufficient clarity as to where we currently stand. But certain things are very, very clear. First things first, India does not have a dedicated cyber security law. And we get that very clear because we are pretty much trailing behind as far as other nations are concerned. So we only have our only mother legislation on IT, being the Information Technology Act 2000. It's special. It's the only law applicable to the electronic format. Yes, in 2008, we amended it and incorporated the definition of cybersecurity, some cosmetic provisions, but that was about all. Just lip service is what we did in 2008 to this. Now, 5 years down the line, we came up with the National Cybersecurity Policy of 2013. However, the last 6 years have told us it's only remained a paper tiger. Now, there's news of a new National Cybersecurity Strategy that's going to be coming up from the office of the National Cybersecurity Coordinator. But the question is, do we really require a national cybersecurity strategy at this juncture, when already the need for having a dedicated national cybersecurity law is far more paramount? A strategy is at best only a vision document. It's not going to have the penal sanction effect that a normal law would have. And I think we are still not learning from the learnings that are writ large on the global wall, that countries who have dedicated laws on cybersecurity are faring far more better than countries like India who don't have dedicated laws in this regard. So when you want to talk of safeguards, you could still have some of them. For example, you could invoke cybercrime, find under Chapter Roman 11 of the Information Technology Act. And these are a variety of these cybercrimes. Thank goodness we enhanced the capacity of and the coverage of these cybercrimes in 2008. So a lot of these cybercrimes have been covered, including identity theft, including hacking, cracking, obscenity, child pornography, and the like. But that's one of the safeguards that you have. Some cybersecurity breaches could also potentially be sought to be covered under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. Though my practical experience shows that the police normally is very hesitant to invoke Indian Penal Code provisions in matters of cybersecurity breaches. However, I think one thing is very clear: neither the IT Act nor the Indian Penal Code are complete or comprehensive. They are still huge gray areas, gaps that have yet to be appropriately addressed. And I think the national lockdown has once again brought forward this immense kind of a disparity that is existing under the Indian law. Of course, the last 2 months have been the golden period for both cyber crimes and also for growing cybersecurity breaches in the country. Never ever in the history of independent India, after internet was introduced, did we see such massive figures of growth of both cyber crimes and cybersecurity breaches in the country. So, coming forward, I believe these stopgap arrangements won't work. Doing a knee-jerk reaction mode will definitely not help the country. You will need to have a dedicated legal framework on cybersecurity. Well, if our nuclear power station could be hacked, if our critical information infrastructure is constantly under attack, I cannot always keep on going under the umbrella of the Indian Information Technology Act for appropriate and adequate coverage per se. India really needs to learn from the experiences that other countries have already come up in terms of having dedicated cyber security laws. Specifically, when I look at China, this country in the last 3 years has got 3 national laws on cyber security. And last month, they introduced new rules under their cyber security law. We could learn from the perspectives of Singapore, of Thailand, Vietnam, and even Australia, when they have come up with distinctive new approaches on how to deal with cyber security breaches and provide for more proactive protection and preservation of cybersecurity. But till such time that does not happen, and I don't see that happening immediately in the next few weeks, I think Indian citizens have to tighten their belts. They have to proactively start protecting their own selves, their own data, and their own computer resources, expecting the government, expecting the law to come to their rescue once they become a victim is a very tall expectation, given the way how cyber criminal actions and prosecutions happen in the country. It is a very, very long grinding process. So I think prevention is always better than cure. If we can start adopting cybersecurity as a way of life, as a culture of living, I think that could be a good starting point. Unfortunately, Indians have not started dabbling in that regard. I've seen so many of these cybersecurity breaches by employees working from home without having any context of the sanctity of the corporate data that they're dealing, handling, or processing. A lot of these cases have not been reported, but that does not mean everything is hunky-dory. I think we'll have to specifically concentrate on capacity building, enhancing not just our own capacities, but also the capacities of our peer groups as we go forward. Thanks. I thought that was my initial thoughts on your question. Thanks, Sundar.
Thank you, Dr. Pavan. I think very well said. We all as individuals first need to be learning to tighten our belt and practice better cyber hygiene. I think we kind of heard from Rama about the problem statement. We heard about cybercrime and the trends from Brijesh, and really spoke about the citizen perspective through our conversation with Rakshit and Dr. Pavan. And I'll probably now move to what really needs to be done from an organization standpoint. But before I do that, just a quick note to everyone listening on this webinar. If you do have questions, please do type them in your chat window. And once our panel discussion, I'll pick up some of
Sundaresh, we lost you.
we all run a greater risk. So how do you balance this, and how do you kind of convince management to invest more for the right message that we have to give back?
Sundar, I guess
Manish?
your question was partly...
We lost you completely in between, so just could you repeat your question?
Sure. So I was what I was saying is that in the state in which the economy is, and in the way profitability is going to be impacted for organizations, there is going to be some amount of reshaping of the budgets to manage cash flows, and we are all going to face this in some form and shape in every organization that we work with. So therefore, if there is an impact on the cyber budgets and if it shrinks, but the risk is actually far higher now. So how does one balance this, and what do you really do in the next 1.5, 2 years to protect the organization with lesser budgets in hand?
Sure. It's a very valid question. See, there used to be a time where information technology used to support business, but I think we are far ahead of that today. Today, information technology is helping drive business, and hence, IT systems, information systems are an integral part of your business strategy, your growth, your continuity, and also your lifeline at such times. So the availability of your systems, the absolute necessity of being able to stay in touch with your customers, to be able to continuously serve them, to render critical services like in the telecom sector, which is also becoming very IT centric now, is absolutely unquestionable. Now, what is the challenge? And this is, this question keeps coming up because at times what happens is that probably my community doesn't do enough to get a simplified and the right message to the board, to the decision makers who may not have the exposure, the knowledge, the in-depth knowledge to probably take the right decision. And then basically the responsibility falls on us to make it simpler, to actually show the negative impact or the positive impact both, present different use case scenarios, and I think that is the best way to convince. However, these are unprecedented times. I mean, as everybody mentioned, Rama said that, Brijesh said that, these are absolutely unprecedented times. This far outshadows what we faced in 2008, and it's going to take some time to recover. It's had a psychological impact, and COVID-19 is not going away so fast. So the threat remains, and hence this is we're in it for the long haul. And here it is extremely important that if your revenues, and there are companies which have been very badly affected, but they are picking up the threads, they are getting back into the market. Now it's extremely important that they keep themselves safe, they keep their data safe, they keep their employees safe, and more importantly, they do whatever is necessary to ensure their supply chain and their customers safe. So you have to prioritize. You have to figure out that, look, if this is what I need to do, what is the stack ranking that needs to go into place? And if I had planned 4 projects or 5 projects, I need to go back to the drawing board and to see, and yes, if the resources are a little lesser than what I had anticipated, then I will have to go back to the drawing board, and I'll have to reprioritize and see what is most important for basically protecting my business, protecting my my customers, and basically protecting my infrastructure. And that's the only way. And perhaps in some cases you have to go back and see, am I getting the necessary return on investment of the money that I have already invested? Because today many companies have actually moved from a capex into an opex model. So it's quite possible in times of plenty, you ended up going for some solutions which probably are not giving you your money's worth, and hence you should have the agility and the dexterity of taking a call and and changing your strategy and if that requires aggregating certain security products and moving on to more efficient, more aggregated solutions, then so be it. But it will require people to put their thinking cap, because there is no other way. Yeah.
Sundar, can I add a point before you move to the next speaker?
Sure, Rama.
Because this is, I mean,
sure.
We from DSCI track the cybersecurity industry very closely,
Absolutely.
Both the global and the Indian one. I do agree there would be a lot of budget cuts in any enterprise, Indian and global. But I think all early estimates of the global analysts, the global consultants, whether it's a McKinsey, BCG, and our own assessment is that while technology spend might remain flat or grow at pretty minuscule level, maybe flat or even go negative. But I think on two levers, particularly cloud and cybersecurity, investments will go up. And we believe government will be one big spender on cybersecurity across the world, and every large enterprise. So we believe that the growth rate for cybersecurity, even if the technology investment and budget cycles remain flat, will be double of last year. That's our assessment.
Okay, that's very interesting, Rama, and thanks, Manish, for your comments on that. Rama, you touched upon the fact that investments in cloud and usage of cloud will probably go up as compared to what it was in the previous years. Sorry, did I hear someone? So, I just want to talk about that a little bit, and maybe Rakshit, if you can just tell us, in a multi-cloud environment, what kind of protection mechanisms that we need to keep in place, given that there's going to be a lot more movement onto cloud platforms, even for transaction processing systems, perhaps?
Yes, it would be, and as everybody is shifting to cloud, and the cloud security will be one of the key issues. So I think the first important point should be selecting the right cloud vendor. That is very important. And having a complete understanding of what are all the accounts which are going to be used and what will be the deployment zones. Because the responsibility to the organization is that when, who and how is accessing the cloud to provide the inputs of different levels of security. Aligning all the tools is also very important. And whatever applications you are running on the cloud, the sanitization should be done, proper VAPT should be done, and because software keeps changing very dynamically, so you can't think that security is going to be a product. It has to be in a kind of a process. It has to be a regular update, and there should be proper SOCs, security operation centers, which should be watching, and proper ideas should be there. DLP should be the main focus here, because recently, I was a small SME. They were having people working from home, and I think one of their systems got infected. One of the employee must have clicked a wrong attachment or a mail, and they got infected to a ransomware, and the whole cloud got infected just because of one mistake. So this would be the challenge. And initially also, when Rama ma'am also said about the same thing, that because now everybody is working from home, they are using home devices, their home networks are there. So in this multi-process cloud environment, security has to be the chief main concern. And especially remote scanning of your public cloud is a must. You should have a regular scanning so that you can check on the virtual images in your public cloud environments. And monitoring. I think these are the key 5 or 6 points, which I think right from the vendor and to the models which they are adapting for security. And on the last thought, it is a process. It is not a product. So please, you cannot just think that once some security has been enabled, this is 100% foolproof. So it has to be a regular process of scanning the applications and the cloud environment.
Sure. Thanks, Rakshit. With that, I think two words that have been used far more than ever before in this area and in the cybersecurity domain that we've been working with are threat intelligence and zero trust architecture. Right. So, Arga, I would like you to kind of demystify zero trust architecture for us in terms of what does it really mean, and how do you start? What kind of milestones that we need to kind of keep in mind when it comes to zero trust architecture? Is there any change in design principles given the new normal and so on and so forth? So help us understand and demystify this for us.
I think in the recent past, we have heard the zero trust architecture being talked about quite actively. Now, it has a context, and we need to kind of go back and understand what is the basis of a zero trust architecture. the basis of any access to an environment is basically based on the level of trust an individual has or is able to gain in that particular environment. I'll try and keep it as simple as possible, right? So uh, now, when we start to provide an access to an individual or group of individuals to company assets or assets that spread across multiple, either in internal data centers, or it could be in the cloud, and so on and so forth. The biggest challenge today we have is data proliferation and people trying to, or having access that they should not have, or having access to areas that they ideally should not have, or their role does not demand those access to be there. So effectively, what has been talked about now is that it's a reversal of the process. Initially, what we say is we used to do is we trust people to a certain level, and then we basically manipulate the accesses based on those trust levels. However, now what we are trying to kind of go back to the process is to say that no, we do not trust anybody. So either and again, distribute the assets and information into areas which are critical and areas which are non-critical, and then you basically have to pick up these threads and to say that for the critical assets we are not going to allow any sort of access till asked for, or till your role demands for it, right? And it could basically mean that you're classifying your data in a manner, and I think a lot of people have talked about data classification and the importance of data privacy in the whole environment in itself. But to be able to classify data, be able to kind of state that that data requires what level of access and what kind of information needs are there for an individual to be able to use this asset or the data is kind of going to define the whole aspect of zero trust network. So it is basically I might take the liberty to say that no, it is still a concept built across, but it has got quite a lot of effect with respect to how organizations are understanding individuals' access into the environment, and we have to also understand that the boundaries are no longer the same that it earlier used to be. People, you have vendors, you have people accessing remotely, and classically in this particular environment where everybody, as Rama said, 95% people are working from remote offices and homes. It is quite pertinent that you redefine the whole access process in itself, and then kind of restrict people's access to the relevant information, and tie it together with proper control mechanisms, so that people do not kind of go to a level or have elevated access or have access beyond their requirements. But that is important. The second point that you talked about is threat intelligence. That is also something which has come into a lot of focus in these particular times, and primarily it is because you need to kind of converse between understanding a threat to reacting to a threat. Now, you could classically be at a stage where you need to be able to preempt an attack happening, and as you expand your boundaries beyond the controls, and you have data again in data centers, it could be cloud, and people accessing from multiple places, your ability to be able to understand and identify a threat from a perspective of somebody, or a potential of a threat being able to be compromised or used to be able to penetrate the network and environment, and you need to be able to preempt that and be able to kind of create intelligence around that, and also be able to kind of, even if and compromise has happened to some level, you need to be able to understand how much level of depth that individual or that attacker has been able to penetrate into the environment, and then be able to tie that out and isolate those environments, and be able to segregate those segments, and kind of bring it into an isolation level where you are able to kind of restrict the problem into lesser amount of impact.
Thanks, Arga. Staying on threat intelligence, I just thought I'll get some perspectives from Brijesh as well. I think Brijesh, through your experience, if you can kind of tell us, there are a lot of vendors who are giving us threat intel feeds, and I'm sure all of them are good. But if you look at it from an organization standpoint, you have multiple threat intelligence feeds that are coming in. Some of them would be false positives, some of them would not be false positives. You've got to stitch all of that together to what is actionable for you. So how does one kind of go through this entire engagement to funnel the intelligence that is actionable for your organization? And one of the questions also that came up from the audience is something related to this, to say that does the government have a national central authority who can really look at what's happening on the cyber traffic within the country and also give us threat intelligence and IOCs? So your thoughts on that, Brijesh? You're on mute, Brijesh.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. I've always felt that and said that you can outsource your security, but not your risk. So while any vendor will come and give you a shiny black box, it doesn't mean that you're secure. Security has to be embedded in the context, and it cannot be done by somebody external. So you will need to have your in-house analysts who understand threats in the specific context of your assets. If you cannot do that, then I think you will be perpetually at risk. And when you will be breached, you will be only left with a contract, which Pawan will help you interpret as to the little asterisks which do not put any liability either on the company which is going to give you cyber insurance, or the shiny vendor which was which was giving you an all-in-one solution. In any tactical or strategic situation, as people from services would understand, that each of the security fortifications have to be built according to the lay of the land and where your important assets lie. See, while this is happening at national level has various kind of cyber formations now. We have a national cybersecurity coordinator, the office in the able hands of Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, who is very proactive. In fact, he directly even interacts with industry. Apart from that, CERT-In has been working very well. It's an old institution. They're now also thinking of coming up with sectoral certs. There is a good body of knowledge in the corporate, like people like Manish, who have directly come from services where they handle very critical things, are imparting this kind of tactical and strategic perspective to industry. So while industry has its strengths in large data crunching, but the question of a strategic perspective will come from somebody who has handled security as a domain. So security by itself is a domain, and somewhere you will need to invest in creating professionals who understand security. They can be from anywhere. You will need to have people right from data analytics to epidemiology, because there are very similar algorithms which are moving in a space where adversaries are functioning. So what may apply in an epidemiology would also probably apply for digital contagion. Like you may see models of misinformation are cross-applicable between cyber domains or between health scenarios. So you will need to have analysts who understand this very well. Government has come up with various bodies. So the Ministry of Home Affairs is now very well coordinating with all the state police departments. State police departments in terms are coming up with their own cyber departments. See, Maharashtra had some kind of a lead there, and I was fortunate enough to establish that. We could come up with a cyber headquarters which had 5 different verticals, one which focused on forensics, one which focused on capacity building and raising capabilities, one which purely focused on cyber security. The CERT part, it is yet to be established, the CERT part, but we are going to come up with a CERT of our own, and one purely focusing on R&D and other things. So there's a large body of knowledge which is being created within the government, but Having said so, a lot needs to be done. The central government has, for at least for cyber crimes, come up with this portal called cybercrime.gov.in. It's essential for everybody to know that you can actually report cyber crimes here. This portal has been running for more than 2.5 years. Initial period, they just utilized it and perfected their policies and procedures just for crimes against women and children. And now they have a very strict ticketing procedure. They follow it up. As soon as a complaint is made, either anonymously or with your authentication details, it is passed on to the particular jurisdictions, which have been now trained and resourced well to investigate. While I understand Pawan would naturally say that it's still very difficult to get cybercrimes registered in India, but see, police is also handling 291 other laws, So it becomes very, very difficult for them just to concentrate all the resources on one law, which again does not give the kind of enablements. See, after Supreme Court's decision in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India in 2015, we are left with a hole. 66A has been removed, and you do not have any teeth. So you utilize something which is, a cobbled up provision from IPC, and then you put it in cyber domain and use it, which becomes very, very difficult at the trial stage in court of law. So evidentiary procedures become different, and if you're working under IPC, CRPC, and Evidence Act, evidence procedures have been sort of transported there, but that transposition just with 65B and others is not complete. So I perfectly agree with Pawan where he says that you should have a legal regime like in the US, right from communication decency to health data to privacy. They have laws and rules and SOPs and procedures for everything. Or when you move to Singapore, you have information commissioners. Or you move to other. So it's not one cyber law we need. We need probably 20, 30, 40 cyber laws today. And while the personal data protection regulation is coming, I feel that there is still a need to have a comprehensive understanding of cybersecurity, cybercrime, cyber law, liability, data protection. These are all different fields which need to be amalgamated into a single thought process. Today, see, if you look at cybercrime, crime is the domain of state governments, and every state government is as different as probably Karnataka and Bengal as different as Germany and Mozambique. Right? So each state is very different. They have local amendments, they have local policing culture, they have different capabilities, they are facing different kind of challenges. So while law enforcement in crime and cybercrime has a local flavor, we somewhere need to understand that this is something which is jurisdictionless. Not only countries where the country's jurisdiction end, where your cables end, but this is something beyond. Even as every crime today has some cyber element, every crime, or some electronic footprint. It can be a message, it can be a communication, it can be a transaction, it can be a picture, it can be a moving image, anything. It can be logs which you have left, it can be authentication trails. But we need an enablement with legal frameworks. We need an enablement with bodies everywhere. We need an enablement with investment. Government is probably the largest consumer of IT today, with smart cities and with digitization of India, with UPI, with Aadhaar. We have come up with a very large digital infrastructure which needs to be protected. Much is being done, but I think that it is time that we do not think in terms of silos, in terms of states, or in terms of jurisdictions, or this is IT, this is cybersecurity, this is law enforcement, this is crime, this is intelligence. You will need to have a comprehensive understanding, because on the other side, the bad guys are cooperating and coordinating very well. In real time, you can purchase things, you can anonymously pay through bitcoins, and you would never be tracked. But in the real world, if I want to have information, let's say even about an account, then I am told that no, that the platform has immunity under either safe harbor or under Section 230C of the Communication Decency Act of the US, where they are scot-free. And whatever request we give would be sort of treated like something where the country's sovereignty is subordinate to a company policy, and they would say, we will see whether it fits in our policy or not. And every company has a different policy. So somewhere this needs to be sorted out. Otherwise, India will, like China, have to go for stringent means like data localization. They say, this is my citizen data. It is the duty of the state to protect my citizen. It is the duty of the state to protect my citizen against harm and to investigate crime. And then I will have data localization, and a country can do it. And I understand that slowly there's a movement that Germany has come up with a law, Australia has come up with a law. Even the US, Senator Hawley has come up with a law which says that it is a law which would end immunity to these social media and internet platforms. So I think a lot of churning is required. We have brilliant minds here. We have Rama and they have NSC, the ASCI and NASCOM have close coordination with the government. It is time that industry also urges upon the government and lobbies so that this digital cyberspace is protected, because post-COVID the world is being rebooted. Everything would be unknown, and it would be also, unfortunately, a very great opportunity. And if we are not cyber safe, if we are exposing everything, if all our IP, all our intellectual properties, all our knowledge is not, we are not able to protect and secure it, then we will find it very difficult to compete against a large panda which has exceptional cyber warfare and offense capabilities, and wherein all elements of the state, right from intelligence to commercial wings, they function as one. So somewhere we need to sort this out. We need to understand this space. We need to develop comprehensive policies, laws, procedures, and bodies to handle this. So Naresh.
Thanks, Brijesh. I think you said it right. The world is really getting rebooted after this pandemic, and just taking a leaf from there. And some of our audience is curious to kind of know. So maybe Manish, if you could come in here. I think most brick and mortar businesses which were less digital before COVID hit us, from an existential crisis standpoint, will probably transact more online, and consumers of theirs will probably be more online to be able to transact with them. But many of these businesses are MSMEs, so they don't have very large appetite to invest in cybersecurity, while the risk that they're actually taking to go online is going to be far higher. So what are some starting points for them? If you could kind of highlight on those.
Yeah, sure. A very valid question. See, the first and foremost thing I think is that organizations need to really understand as to what is their core business. And in most of the cases, their core business is not information technology or cybersecurity. They're big users of IT and IT security. And absolutely, if an organization can invest, must invest in having the in-house expertise, so that their cybersecurity and digital transformation is not dictated by external entities. You must have some in-house capability, but that is not a luxury that most small and medium businesses, particularly the MSME space, can actually afford. So I think where that comes in is basically a very aggressive adoption of cloud technologies. Cloud is hyperscale, hyper flexible, and hyper secure. And in that again, in some cases, many of these businesses may be fairly regulated also. We also have this whole issue of data privacy, the data privacy bill around the corner, and keeping all those things in mind, I think it would be very, very difficult, very expensive for organizations, small organizations in particular, to really handle everything on their own. So they must adopt the cloud. And adoption of the cloud also gives them the benefit of a phenomenal amount of outreach. And in the country, there is a lot of work which is happening with respect to implementation of standards and best practices. Absolutely, as Pawan said, that there we need a better IT, better laws around information technology and security. But I'm sure that we'll see that day as well. But specifically with respect to technology, I think there is absolutely no other way but rather for such small organizations to adopt cloud very, very aggressively. What they really need to do in order to keep the costs low is rather than buying security products, what they need to focus on is to what is the service that they are getting. So I think the need of the hour is to give a solution, a holistic solution to the customer, as against trying to sell them a product by product. It would be akin to somebody trying to sell me a car and say, hey, you have to buy 4 wheels separately. I need a car with 4 wheels. So that I can drive it out of the showroom. And I think, having said so, I think even as a CISO for a large organization, I am no longer looking for products. I'm looking for solutions. And for small organizations, that is the most important thing. I can't disclose too much, but I can share this that at Airtel, we are extremely sensitive and we are very, very mindful of this need of a certain customer base. And we are putting our minds together to see how can we take some very cost-effective solutions into the market, because at the end of the day, we provide connectivity. So I think what would really matter for the small business, the smaller business community, is where they get solutions at a great cost, where they're able to protect their endpoints, they're able to protect their channel of communication, and they are able to leverage their infrastructure, which is based on the cloud, where the larger aspect of security is taken care of by the cloud service provider.
Sundreshwar, I want to add, because SMB is very close personally to my heart and to DSCI.
I was about to come to you anyway, Rama. So good.
Yeah.
Please come
particularly on SMB. I will come back on the other one, because I do agree one is on the cloud. The second thing is most security products are now completely cloud enabled. Even in fact, if you look at the security startups and product companies from India, when we just did a recent assessment, 80% of them are either cloud only or cloud ready. So that is one option. Similarly, a lot of micro small enterprises may not hire a full-time company secretary. You'll be surprised that DSCI, we have a finance head plus a company secretary, but we have a company secretary on a retainer who helps my finance head as a small, because we are a small organization ourselves. So we now, just like company secretaries are hired on a retainership basis or as a consultant to help MSME for compliance and filing all the MCA things, now CISO as a service is something that there is a platform-based CISO service delivery. I know of a very small startup in Mumbai who built a platform and offers CISO as a service. So there are many of these models. We ourselves have built something called as the Cyber Adoption Framework, which is a free tool set which you can assess. You can get a score of what is your digital risk, because every MSME is at a different level of security risk. They can, based on how digital they are, they can assess a risk and take a call on where they need to invest on. I think there are a lot of tools now to be able to support, but I think state governments and central government, just like IT adoption was being supported in the initial days, security investments for MSME, there also needs to be a program from government.
Sure, thanks, Rama. I think we've spoken a lot about the whole thing about, Brijesh also mentioned, and so did Manish, on privacy. And consumer data privacy, and what kind of regulations and enforcements that we have from the government. What safeguards do we really have? So Dr. Pawan, if you can really throw light on that with a couple of use cases for our audience, it'll help.
Well, thanks, Sundreshwar. Can I just have sharing the screen? I had some slides which I thought I'll like to share with you, which could show us the way. We ask the technical team to help me share the screen. Okay, thank you. So when I talk about consumer privacy and consumer data privacy, and I'm looking from a regulation and enforcement standpoint, I'm a confused person, primarily because confusion is writ large on the landscape when I look at. If we are expecting India to have a dedicated data privacy legislation in place, we are going to be slightly disappointed. We do not have a data privacy legislation. Yes, we have the cyber law, but the cyber law has only got limited aspects of coverage of data privacy. Now, complicating this entire scenario has been the judgment of Justice Puttaswamy versus Union of India, where they have this 9-judge bench has unanimously held that my right to privacy is part of my fundamental right to life, under Article 21 of the Constitution, and it cannot be deprived except in accordance with procedure established below. So does that mean when I have a right to privacy, I have a right to consumer data privacy? That's going to be a logical subset of this fundamental right to privacy. And if the government wants to deprive me of the same, they will have to have a legal framework to do that. Unfortunately, they have no legal framework either to protect my data privacy or to deprive me of the same. Even specifically when I look at the different laws, I don't find any specific provisions to deal with consumer data privacy per se. So not specific provisions under different laws. The best case hope scenario is the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, but that's pending before the Joint Parliamentary Committee. But expecting data privacy to flow out of Personal Data Protection Bill is also going to be a fallacy, because that's a very, very specific legislation. That's only going to deal with protection of personal data, period. Other kinds of data are not necessarily going to be covered. So large chunks of consumer data privacy may not be directly coverable under the Personal Data Protection Bill. So in this context, what is the best thing that I can do to resort to? I can go back to Section 43A of the Information Technology Act 2000, wherein the legal entity that's giving me services has to have in place reasonable security practices, procedures when they are handling or processing my sensitive personal data as a customer. And if they're not able to do the same, and because of the negligence I get exposed to some wrongs, I can sue them for unlimited damages by way of compensation. A wonderful provision on paper. Fact remains, on ground reality, we've not been able to effectively convert it into deterrent provisions, because deterrent damages by way of compensation have yet not been awarded. Yes, we could also rely upon certain provisions of the Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines Rules 2011, and also the Information Technology Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures and the Sensitive Personal Data or Information Rules 2011. There were some aspects of consumer privacy per se. But please understand, these rules were written almost 10 years back in 2011. We have not updated these rules, and they require an urgent, crying need for updation, modification of the year 2020. Further enforcement of this entire provisions of data privacy, it's a very poor level. Actually speaking, we don't have a dedicated central authority who can be made responsible for everything pertaining to consumer data privacy. And much that we have different other statutory authorities, all of them tend to look at data privacy, specifically consumer data privacy, with a stepmotherly kind of a treatment. So lack of a data protection law, lack of a dedicated law on privacy, and lack of any attention to detail by other statutory stakeholders and authorities effectively means that this is a neglected sector. I want to go to the Consumer Protection Act thinking it's going to help me, and I'm disappointed, because the Consumer Protection Act is of the year 1986. Even its amendments have not been able to be passed, and that does not really need much in terms of protecting my consumer privacy. So what do you really need to do? Again, we really need to act for having in place a dedicated legal framework to protect consumer data privacy. In fact, I think India is at a very interesting cusp as far as history is concerned, because right now the Joint Parliamentary Committee is looking at the Personal Data Protection Bill. I believe the experiences of India during COVID-19 should substantially inform the making of such more detailed provisions in the said legislation pertaining to data privacy, specifically consumer data privacy, given the fact that we don't have any dedicated specific focal legal frameworks in this regard. And I think that's going to be a good, important building block as we ultimately go in the direction of creating cyber resilience. Well, what should we do today? It's not that the government is powerless. The government has got the power right now, today, this afternoon, under Section 87 of the Information Technology Act 2000, to come up with specific rules and regulations on consumer data privacy. Because ultimately, when I talk about consumer data privacy, in almost a majority kind of a framework status, I'm talking about privacy pertaining to data and information of the consumers in the electronic form. And since those raw materials are effectively covered under the Indian IT law, the government could overnight come up with these rules and regulations, but that's going to require political will. Well, I think the learnings that India has got from the work from home paradigm and the work from home ecosystem needs to be also filling up the making of these new guidelines and appropriate legal frameworks. Because when you've been working from home, you had a different inside view of what the consumer data privacy is throwing up as a paradigm and what kind of distinctive challenges do consumers need to specifically keep in mind, and what kind of statutory frameworks and protections do legal provisions need to be providing consumers in the work from home paradigm. Now, complicating this entire scenario is the advent of these newly emerging technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's Internet of Things, or whether it's blockchain. These are going to open up a new Pandora's box because there are increasing cybersecurity breaches happening using these newly emerging technologies. And therefore, when I, as a nation, need to look at a holistic approach at consumer data privacy, I need to be mindful of the impact of these new emerging technologies on the entire issue of consumer privacy. See, I've already written this book called The New Cyber World Order Post-COVID-19, which is up on Amazon. And in that book, I've argued that the world is changing irreversibly. By the time we come to the close of COVID-19, it will be a new cyberspace that we will be entering into. The ground realities would have changed completely. Cyber legal frameworks would have changed. There will be massive surveillance. The states are going to get very powerful, and there are going to be increasing infringement of civil liberties. In this ecosystem, I think we will need to look at how we can try to somehow protect and preserve consumer data privacy. And I believe that the government can play a very, very important and proactive role in the direction of protecting consumer privacy. Otherwise, if we don't do anything, by the time COVID-19 ends, I don't know what, 6 months, 1 year later, it will be completely changed around realities, which will make it even more difficult to protect consumer and data privacy, unless you really want to go on to the darknet for all kinds of purposes, both legitimate and illegitimate. And finally, I think we'll have no choices but right now to focus on far more enhanced capacity building and awareness amongst consumers about their consumer data privacy. That has to be the only mantra for a country of 1.3 billion people, where the law and the legal frameworks are lagging far behind, where we have umpteen number of new priorities to deal with. So till such time as these frameworks don't come up, I believe we will have to sensitize these new people who have come on the digital bandwagon during the national lockdown periods, to sensitize them on how they can contribute to the direction of protecting these entire issues of consumer data privacy. Thanks, Sundareshwar. Over to you.
Thank you, Pawan. That was very, very insightful. I think taking something from what you said, as well as what really our audience is asking, is Rama, they've caught on to what you said in terms of saying that government spending in cybersecurity will perhaps go up. So can you kind of double click on that a little bit and give us slightly more details? And maybe Arga, you can add on to that to say, what is your expectation as an organization from the government in terms of where they're kind of going to be able to spend? So Rama, over to you.
Yes. So first is, overall, I think businesses and enterprises are going to spend more on security. But when there are so many citizens going online, schools are going virtual. We don't know what is the time when the schools will open up, right? Schools, public, whether it's government or private schools, when there and the healthcare services is going, a lot is going virtual. So there is going to be an imperative to spend more on digital and obviously spend more on security. And while we have to see how those investments will happen, I am confident that the governments will have to step up, given the nature of the cybercrime threat, the spear phishing mail, even in terms of end user awareness and investing. I hope there will be some scheme where small and medium businesses, as they go digital, as they go online, there would be some investments in that. Are there budgets announced for that? I don't. There is no such early announcement. But any government needs to protect its businesses plus citizens and various verticals. So I am sure there is going to be more spend on cyber from government. To add to what Mr. Brijesh talked about, if we even if you see CERT in the last few months, the number of advisories they've been releasing, tracking all the cyber crimes and working with CISOs of at a vertical level, banking sector, critical information structure. I don't know, I mean, if all of us know that advisories go by vertical to each of the CISOs, including all the IOCs and all of that. So stepping up of that, the National Cybersecurity Coordinator's Office, once the cybersecurity strategy is announced, obviously a strategy needs an implementation roadmap, right? So that implementation roadmap, I don't have any reason to not believe that there would be budgetary backing.
Thanks, Rama. Arga, would you have any comments around that? Rama, we'll come back to you on the resumption strategy. We are all very keen to hear on that.
Yeah, I think, we touched upon a few points, and specifically around how this entire country and maybe the entire world needs to understand cybersecurity from a different lens altogether. India per se, typically working from home culture not been there. Suddenly everybody is kind of working from home, and the challenges they are facing with respect to the cyber crimes that have been happening. And specifically, if you look at it, the hampered people are those who are not typically conscious about the cybersecurity aspects. The children, the families, and the people who are not directly kind of have the knowledge and have been compromised from that matter. And I think the panelists talked about how the how videos have been shared and things have been compromised, and people know. If you look at it, other countries, and specifically, they've started educating children on cybersecurity from grade 5 to, I think, 11, or ages 5 to 11, and things like that. Both free, as well as in US on some $100 of charge. But the aspect is that it is pertinent now that everybody from a child to an adult and to an elderly needs to understand the aspect of cybersecurity and the challenges around it. Because now what we are seeing is something that we are going to live with for quite some time, in some shape or form, in some different ways. Either working from home or a lot of things streamed digitally, a lot of people communicating over social media and things like that will continue. So it is important that people themselves are aware of the cybersecurity requirements, and that is also something that needs to be covered. And the second aspect is, obviously, Dr. Pawan touched upon, is the government. I would expect the government to as soon as possible get the regulations and laws in place to be able to kind of have the right framework to where the cybersecurity aspects and for that matter the right to information and the right to your identity and information being shared across multiple platforms being controlled as well. So that is definitely something that I'm looking forward to kind of having as quickly as possible, and the action that the government can take around that.
Sure. Thanks, Arga. So we'll now probably move to a topic which we are probably all waiting for, which is around getting back to normal. Hopefully, in various states and cities, depending on what guidelines our government gives us. But given the fact that we will all go back to normal at some point in time, I just thought I'll call in Rama to talk about what is the way to go through a resumption plan. And given the fact that DSCI has done an analysis on that as well, so what could be, the way we should go back? Rama?
Yeah, thanks, Sundareshwar. Sorry, I didn't mean to share the slide out of turn. I think I was just trying to get it ready and inadvertently share the slide. So can you all see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, we had worked on this plan when we were doing a lot of the CISO calls. I think the resumption strategy needs to be very nuanced. You cannot just make one common resumption strategy. And based on our discussions with some of the CISOs of Indian enterprises, there's a nice 6-phased framework that has come up with. The most important thing is, I think the resumption plan by the CIO and the CISO needs to look at, is it's completely contained and there's a complete lifting of the lockdown, or there could be a rolling lockdown is lifted and situation changes, and then lockdown is again implemented, or there could be an escalation of the pandemic. I think as a risk professional and as a CISO, we need to be able to be planning for all of this. So there's a 6-phase approach that the DSI team has developed. It's there on our homepage. This advisory is there, where we look at what is the awareness in terms of the focus on the user awareness. And one challenge we see is that there was a work from home at scale, and then there will be a return to work or resuming from workplaces also at scale, and almost 6 to 8 months, 8 weeks or 8 to 12 weeks, we don't know the time frame, those machines and endpoints have been out of a secure intranet and on the VPN. So how do we go ahead and scale up to be able to do that patch management, the complete testing? Because it's not just enabling work from home, resuming back to work from office also needs a lot of CISO attention. Similarly, look at preparing, and the push is the next step, where you look at the infrastructure, what is the baseline, the hardening. There's a third step, which is the scan and the sanitize, where we really need to assess based on the gap and the patch management, whether it's including maybe backups, all of that. There is a whole lot of scan and sanitize. And then we allow and the admit. That's the next phase in terms of the user access to the machine, maybe a total refresh and check on their entire access management and the privileges, because some of them may have been locked down or some of them may have been enabled. Both situations are there. And then you go ahead and track and trace, and then the compliant conclude. So it's a beautiful 6-step process. And in fact, there's one advisory that is already released, another one should be coming up in a day or two, which is like a good framework. Even the small and medium organizations, if they don't have an in-house CISO which is planning all of this, the advisory will be able to give them. This has been developed using a lot of cross-sectoral learnings and discussions, and it's not a trivial task. Enabling work from home at scale was not a trivial task. When you resume back, again, one is the COVID uncertainty and the lockdown uncertainties in a zone, containments, building wise, or a city, because it's a fact that we don't know what, there's a lot of uncertainty on when the pandemic the COVID will go away, right? Even that situation, how do we do a phased approach? And it's like a cycle, because it's, for all you know, in a certain city or in a certain state, we might have to resume again work from home at scale even after resumption. So I think we need to evolve this framework.
Thank you very much, Rama. I think this is very useful in terms of inputs based on assimilation of your discussions with various cyber professionals across the industry. And I think one must really go through it in terms of what learnings we can all take. I think we've come to the end of the discussion, and we've also kind of run out of time. I would like to, first of all, a big shout out and a thank you to all our panelists for taking time for about 90 minutes and engaging us in this discussion. I do hope that we've been able to answer most of the questions, or maybe in fact some of the questions that the audience had. And I do wish that all of us are safe and healthy, and we kind of get back to normal, whatever that normal really means in the new normal. Yeah, thank you very much for a very patient hearing. Aarti, over to you.
So I think we've got a lot of things. It is very interesting session, and I really want to thank you everybody for their time. And we have got a lot of takeaways with us. There are a lot of questions which we have from audience, and I think we can, let everybody know about those questions. Though we have tried, we have addressed many questions from them. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you again on different topics with us.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you, and have a good weekend. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.
You all have a good weekend. Bye bye. Stay safe. Bye.